The air that hit my face as I stepped off the plane was like a warm velvet blanket, thick with the scent of exotic flowers and the distant, clean hum of electric vehicles. The airport terminal wasn't just a building, it was a monument to wealth. Polished marble floors reflected a ceiling that seemed to be woven from pure gold, and waterfalls cascaded down crystal walls. The sound a gentle symphony against the hushed efficiency of it all. This was the nation spoken of in whispers, a tiny kingdom floating on a sea of oil, the richest place on earth. My architectural contract, a prize I had fought tooth and nail for, felt like a golden ticket, a chance to build a legacy in a city that was itself a masterpiece. I was escorted not to a taxi, but to a silent, self-driving pod that glided through streets so clean you could eat from them. Skyscrapers, impossibly elegant, pierced the clouds, their surfaces shimmering with solar panels and hanging gardens. There were no beggars, no litter, no graffiti. Everything was perfect, a meticulously crafted utopia. The sheer, breathtaking scale of the wealth was intoxicating, a heady perfume that promised a life beyond my wildest dreams. I was to design the new National Gallery, a building meant to be the jewel in the kingdom's crown, and the advance on my salary was more than my father had earned in his entire life. My pod docked silently at my new apartment complex. A holographic butler shimmered into existence, welcoming me by name. My apartment was a palace in the sky, with panoramic views of the gleaming city and a fridge that restocked itself. But as the sun set, casting long, perfect shadows across the perfect city, a message scrolled across the glass wall. Welcome. Curfew is in effect from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Public displays of affection are forbidden. Criticism of the state is a crime. Enjoy your prosperity. Obedience is peace. The words hung in the air, a cold counterpoint to the luxury surrounding me, the first hint that this golden cage had very real bars. Bah! My first few weeks were a blur of architectural meetings and dazzling social introductions. The people I met were impeccably polite, their smiles as polished as the chrome that adorned their flying vehicles. They spoke of stock portfolios and rare art with a casualness that was staggering, yet the conversations felt scripted, shallow. No one spoke of politics, of personal struggles, of anything that might disrupt the serene surface. It was like interacting with a cast of actors in a play where everyone knew their lines, and the penalty for improvisation was terrifyingly unclear. The perfection was beginning to feel sterile, the silence between words more profound than the words themselves. The project was a dream. The budget was effectively limitless. I was given access to materials I had only read about in textbooks and a team of engineers. Who could make my most ambitious designs a reality? I poured my soul into the work, sketching arches that defied gravity and galleries that bathed artwork in natural light. This was my chance to create something truly immortal. But I noticed the ever-present cameras, sleek and unobtrusive, in every office, on every street corner, even in the parks. The feeling of being constantly watched was a low-grade hum beneath the surface of my new life, a reminder that privacy was the one luxury not for sale. One evening I made a simple mistake. I was walking with a colleague, an affable man named Kale, and I laughed too loudly at one of his jokes. Throwing my arm around his shoulder in a moment of spontaneous camaraderie, instantly 2 uniformed officers appeared as if from nowhere. Their faces were impassive, their voices low but firm. They didn't shout or threaten. They simply informed me that such unrestrained behavior was inappropriate and issued a formal warning, which was digitally tethered to my identity file. Kel's face went pale, and he barely spoke to me for a week. The incident was a splash of ice water, a stark lesson that in this land of boundless wealth, the currency of human emotion was strictly regulated. The warning changed something in me. The city, once a glittering symbol of opportunity, now seemed to hold a quiet menace. Started noticing the things I hadn't before, the way people's eyes would dart around before they spoke, the subtle, almost imperceptible flinches when a patrol vehicle glided past. The opulence began to feel like a distraction, a beautiful mask for a suffocating system of control. My magnificent apartment, with its stunning views, felt less like a home and more like an observation deck from which I could see the full extent of my gilded prison. Work became my only refuge. In the clean, logical world of blueprints and stress calculations, I could find a semblance of freedom. My design for the gallery was bold, a swirling vortex of glass and bioluminescent algae, that was meant to represent the fusion of nature and progress. The High Council, the nation's faceless rulers, loved it. They praised my visionary spirit, a compliment that felt deeply ironic. I was being celebrated for my creativity in a society that did everything in its power to stifle it in its citizens. The hypocrisy was a bitter pill to swallow. It was during a late night at the studio, staring out at the city's electric veins, that I first saw her. She was in the park below, a lone figure in a sea of manicured perfection. While everyone else walked on the designated paths, she was dancing on the grass, her movements fluid and expressive under the moonlight. A silent rebellion in a world of rigid lines. It was the most human thing I had seen since I arrived. I didn't know who she was, but in that moment, watching her defiant grace, I felt a spark of something I thought had been extinguished. Hope. Finding her again became an obsession. I started spending my evenings in the same spot, hoping for another glimpse of the girl who danced on the forbidden grass. For days there was nothing. I began to think I had imagined her, a hallucination brought on by loneliness and pressure. Then, one evening, I saw her not in the park, but at a small state-sanctioned art exhibit. She was standing before a sterile, abstract sculpture, but her eyes held a fire of critique that the artist had clearly never intended. She was even more captivating up close, with a quiet intensity that seemed to defy the placid world around her. Her name was Alara. Gathering every ounce of my courage, I approached her, my heart hammering against my ribs. I commented on the sculpture using the same bland, approved language as everyone else. She turned to me, and a small, knowing smile played on her lips. "You don't believe that?" she said, her voice a soft whisper. It wasn't a question, that moment. She saw right through the mask I had learned to wear. Our conversation was brief, a dance of coded language and shared glances. But the connection was electric, a dangerous and exhilarating current in the stagnant air. We began to meet in secret. Our dates were stolen moments in the city's forgotten corners, an old, decommissioned transit tunnel, the rooftop of a service building, the one small wild patch of coastline the developers hadn't yet tamed. With Alara, the world came alive with color. She showed me the cracks in the utopia, the underground markets where forbidden music was traded, the hushed circles where people shared banned poetry. She was a dissident of the soul, and I found myself falling for her, knowing full well that loving her was the most illegal act I could possibly commit. "Why do you stay?" I asked her one night, as we sat on the untamed beach, the city's glow a false dawn on the horizon. The waves, a rare, uncontrolled element, crashed against the shore. It was the one sound that could drown out the city's hum. "You don't belong here. You're too alive for this place." I could feel the tension in her, the constant wearying effort of pretending to be someone she wasn't. The risk we were taking by just being together was immense. A single patrol, a single anonymous tip, and our lives would be over. Alara looked away, her gaze fixed on the dark, endless sea. "This is my home," she said, her voice laced with a profound sadness. "My family is here. It's my history. My father was a professor, a man who believed in asking questions. He taught me to see the world for what it is, not what they tell us it is." She paused, and I knew there was more to the story. "They took him when I was a girl. He asked one question too many in a public forum. We never saw him again. They said he was re-educated for his own well-being. The casual cruelty of it chilled me to the bone. The state didn't just punish, it erased. It rewrote history, turning vibrant, questioning minds into blank pages. Alara's rebellion, her secret dances, and forbidden art wasn't just for herself. It was a tribute to her lost father, a way of keeping his spirit alive in the face of a system that had tried to extinguish it. My love for her deepened into a fierce, protective awe. She wasn't just a girl I was falling for. She was a flickering flame of truth in a world of gilded lies. Our secret world was a fragile bubble. The constant fear of discovery was a poison that seeped into everything. Every shared laugh was cut short. Every touch was tinged with anxiety. We became experts in deception, communicating through a complex system of innocuous-seeming messages and signals. I would leave a specific architectural drawing on my desk, visible from the street, to signal a meeting place. She would wear a particular color, a tiny flower in her hair. It was a thrilling, exhausting ballet of subterfuge. The pressure at work was mounting. The High Council demanded perfection, and my design for the gallery was scrutinized down to the last millimeter. They saw it as a symbol of their benevolent power, a testament to the prosperity they provided. For me, it had become a monument to my own hypocrisy. I was building a beautiful cage while the woman I loved was slowly suffocating inside it. The swirling glass and light, once a source of pride, now seemed to mock me, its beauty as hollow as the smiles of the elite. One evening, we almost got caught. We were in a hidden alcove, overlooking a canal, sharing a moment of rare, unguarded affection. Suddenly, the telltale hum of a patrol drone grew louder. We froze, our hearts stopping. The drone hovered just meters away, its single red optical sensor sweeping the area. I pulled Alara into the shadows, shielding her with my body, convinced this was the end. The drone remained for what felt like an eternity before finally moving on. We stayed hidden for an hour, trembling, the reality of our situation crashing down on us. The bubble had burst. This couldn't go on. The near miss with the drone left a permanent scar on our relationship. The carefree moments, already so rare, vanished completely. Fear was now a constant third companion, sitting between us, poisoning our conversations with its cold presence. Allara grew more withdrawn, the light in her eyes dimming. I saw the toll this life was taking on her, the slow erosion of her spirit. The kingdom's wealth, the gleaming towers and effortless luxury, meant nothing when you couldn't hold the hand of the person you loved without terror. I began to see the rot beneath the golden veneer everywhere. I saw a man being led away by officers for planting his own vegetables in a public garden bed, a violation of the state's agricultural monopoly. I saw a teenager sentenced to a month of public service for listening to unapproved music on a personal device. These weren't violent criminals. They were ordinary people whose only crime was a flicker of individuality. The punishments were always quiet, efficient, and absolute, designed to enforce conformity through 1,000 small terrors. My breaking point came when I was invited to a private viewing of a new correctional facility. It was presented as a marvel of humane engineering, a place where citizens who had lost their way could be gently guided back to a productive life. It was a pristine white building that looked more like a spa than a prison. But as the warden proudly showed off the sensation-dampening rooms and behavioral adjustment technology, I felt a wave of nausea. This was the place Alara's father had been taken. This was the soulless machine that polished the flaws out of humanity, and I was helping to build its beautiful, deceptive face. That night, I went to Alara. I found her in her small, sterile apartment, a place that was the polar opposite of her vibrant spirit. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of our impossible situation. "I have to leave," I said, the words tumbling out of me in a desperate rush. "I can't do this anymore, Alara. I can't be a part of this. Can't live like this. Always hiding, always afraid. There is a world outside of this place." Hey. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a desperate flickering hope. "Leave," she whispered, the words sounding foreign. "Impossible. No one just leaves. The borders are sealed. They monitor everything. It's a fantasy." She had been born in the cage. The thought of a world without its bars was too vast, too terrifying to comprehend. Her spirit, so defiant in its small rebellions, had been conditioned to believe that escape was impossible. "It's not a fantasy," I insisted, my voice dropping, filled with a conviction I didn't entirely feel. "There are ways, there have to be. People who build systems also know their flaws. I'm an architect, Alara. I design complex structures. I can find a flaw in this one. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any contacts. All I had was a desperate, burning need to get her out, to see her dance freely under a sky that wasn't filled with watching eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I saw a genuine spark of her old fire return. The decision to escape transformed us. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now overlaid with a sense of purpose. We were no longer just victims of the system. We were actively fighting back. Our secret meetings were no longer about stolen moments of affection, but about strategy and planning. I began to study the city not as an architect, but as an escape artist, looking for the gaps in its perfect, oppressive design. My position as the gallery's lead architect gave me access. I studied the city's infrastructure grids, the the subterranean transport networks, the coastal patrol schedules, all under the guise of integrating my building's systems. I pored over schematics of the border wall, a marvel of engineering that was said to be impenetrable. Every detail I uncovered, every potential weakness, was a small victory, a tiny chip in the monolithic facade of the state's control. Ilara, meanwhile, used her own network. The quiet dissidents, the traders of forbidden art and music, they knew things. They knew which guards were susceptible to bribes, which surveillance sectors had blind spots, and who had tried to escape before and failed. Their stories were grim, cautionary tales of capture and re-education, but within them were vital clues. We were piecing together a puzzle in the dark, where every piece was a risk, and the completed picture was a freedom we could barely imagine. Our first real lead came from an unlikely source. Kale, the colleague I had inadvertently gotten into trouble months before. He had been distant ever since the incident, his fear a palpable wall between us. But one day he approached me, his face etched with a new kind of anxiety. His daughter had been flagged for ideological noncompliance at school for asking too many questions, just like Elara's father. The state's cold gaze was now turning towards his own family, and his terror had finally outweighed his obedience. He had heard whispers, he told me in a hushed, trembling voice, of a route out through the old, abandoned desalination plants on the coast. They were relics from a previous era, before the current regime had consolidated its power and sealed the nation off from the world. The plants were considered structurally unsound and were off-limits, their subterranean tunnels flooded and unmapped. The state's surveillance was weaker there, focusing on the high-tech border wall instead. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the first tangible path we had. Ilara was hesitant. The plan was fraught with danger. The tunnels could be death traps, and if we were caught, there would be no quiet warning, no gentle re-education. We would be made examples of. I looked at her at the lines of exhaustion and fear that had become a permanent part of her beautiful face. "What kind of life are we living now?" I asked softly, hiding in the shadows, afraid to breathe. I would rather die reaching for the light than live forever in this perfect, suffocating darkness. She met my gaze, and in her eyes, I saw her final decision. The plan was simple in concept, terrifyingly complex in execution. We would need to slip away from our lives without raising any alarms. Started siphoning off small, untraceable amounts of digital currency, converting them into physical tokens that were used in the underground markets. Lara gathered a small survival kit. Water purifiers, nutrient packs, a simple first aid kit. Every item was a risk, a piece of evidence that could condemn us. My final act as the state's star architect was to approve the security schematics for the new gallery. As I did, I embedded a hidden command into the city's network, a tiny malicious piece of code. It was designed to create a citywide communications blackout for precisely 7 minutes, timed for the night of the annual Prosperity Gala, an event where the entire nation's attention would be focused on the High Council. Those 7 minutes of digital silence would be our only window. The day of the gala arrived, a storm of anxiety and adrenaline. I went to work as normal, my face a mask of professional calm, while my mind raced through every step of the plan. I said goodbye to Kale, a simple handshake that was filled with a universe of unspoken meaning. He had given us our chance at great personal risk. I would never know if his daughter would be safe, another soul I was leaving behind in the golden cage. That evening, as I put on my formal attire for the gala I was supposed to attend, I looked at my reflection. The man staring back was a stranger, a ghost about to vanish from the richest, strictest country on earth. Ilara was waiting for me at the edge of the city, where the manicured parks gave way to overgrown marshland. She was dressed in dark, practical clothing, her face pale but resolute in the twilight. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. We shared one last look at the gleaming spires of the city, a place of breathtaking beauty and soul-crushing oppression. It had promised me everything, and had almost taken my soul. Then, we turned our backs on it and melted into the shadows of the wetlands. The journey to the desalination plant was a nightmare. We waded through thick, foul-smelling water, insects buzzing around our heads. Sounds of the wild, so absent in the sterile city, were now a terrifying cacophony. Every rustle of leaves, every splash in the water, sent a jolt of panic through me. We were stripped of our technology, our comfort, our status. We were just two people, armed with nothing but a desperate plan and a shared hope. We reached the plant an hour before midnight, a colossal rusting skeleton against the moonlit sky. It was a ghost of a different time, a time of industry and grit, before the nation had polished itself into a flawless diamond. The entrance to the tunnels was a gaping, dark maw that smelled of salt and decay. As we stood at the precipice, the distant sound of the gala's opening fireworks echoed through the night. The countdown had begun. It was time to descend into the darkness. The tunnels were a labyrinth. Air was thick and cold, and the darkness was absolute, broken only by the narrow beams of our flashlights. Water dripped from the ceiling, a constant, unnerving rhythm. We moved slowly, my purloined schematics, now committed to memory, our only guide. The plan was to follow a series of maintenance conduits that led directly to an old seawater outflow pipe, one that emptied beyond the coastal patrol line. An hour into our descent, disaster struck. A section of the tunnel ahead had collapsed, blocking our path completely. A mountain of rusted metal and crumbling concrete stood between us and our freedom. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. This was it. It was over. All our planning, all our risks, had led to this dead end. I sank to the ground, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand, the weight of our failure crushing me. But Alara did not despair. Her face, illuminated in the gloom, was a mask of fierce determination. "No," she said, her voice echoing in the confined space. "My father taught me that there is always another way. You just have to be willing to look for it." She began to examine the walls of the tunnel, her hands running over the cold, damp surfaces. She pointed to a smaller, unmarked service duct near the floor, half hidden behind a tangle of corroded pipes. It wasn't on my schematics. It was a forgotten passage, a flaw in the design. It was our only hope. The service duct was a claustrophobic nightmare. We had to crawl on our hands and knees, dragging our small pack behind us. The air grew thin and stale, and the darkness seemed to press in on us, a physical weight. I could hear Alara's ragged breathing behind me, and I focused on it, using the sound to anchor myself, to fight back the rising tide of panic. We were no longer architects or artists. We were animals, burrowing our way towards the light. After what felt like an eternity, the duct opened into a larger chamber. In the center of the room was a huge, rusted turbine, silent for decades. And beyond it, we saw it, a faint, circular patch of lighter darkness. The outflow pipe. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees buckled. We had found it. We were close. As we scrambled towards the pipe, a new sound reached us. The distant but unmistakable whir of a drone. Our hearts froze. They knew. The blackout must not have worked, or they had found us some other way. We flattened ourselves behind the turbine, extinguishing our lights, our bodies trembling in the cold and dark. The worry grew louder, closer. A searchlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the chamber, inching its way towards our hiding place. The searchlight beam swept past us, illuminating the far wall of the chamber before retracting. The drone hovered for a moment longer, its worry the sound of our impending doom. And then it moved on, its sound fading down a different tunnel. We had been spared, but we knew our time was running out. The blackout was about to happen, and we had to be at the outflow pipe when it did. We scrambled the rest of the way, our lungs burning, our muscles screaming in protest. The outflow pipe was sealed by a massive iron grill, thick with rust. It was held in place by a series of locking bolts, corroded by years of salt and water. I had brought a hydraulic wrench, a heavy, cumbersome tool I had smuggled from my workshop. As I worked on the first bolt, the sound of metal grinding against metal was deafening in the silence. Every second felt like an hour. Every scrape of the wrench a siren call to our pursuers. Suddenly, the world plunged into an even deeper darkness. The faint emergency lights in the tunnel, which we hadn't even noticed, went out. The distant hum of the city ceased. My watch, a simple analog one I had chosen for this purpose, showed it was exactly 2 a.m. The blackout had started. 7 minutes. Lar held the flashlight steady as I worked with frantic energy, the beam a single point of focus in our silent, dark world. The bolts groaned, resisted, and then, one by one, they began to give way. With a final agonized screech of metal, the last bolt gave way. The grill was free. Working together, we pushed the immense weight of it open just enough to squeeze through. The air that hit us was fresh, cool, and tasted of salt and freedom. We were out of the tunnels. Below us, the sea churned, black and forbidding. We were on a narrow ledge on the outside of the coastal wall, high above the water. The escape was far from over. According to the plan, a small, automated fishing skiff, hired anonymously through the underground network, was supposed to be waiting for us. I peered into the darkness, my heart pounding. For a moment, I saw nothing but the endless, empty sea. The thought that we had come this far only to be abandoned was a new, refined form of torture. Then Alara gasped and pointed. A tiny light blinked once, then twice, a quarter of a mile out. It was there. The climb down was treacherous. We used a rope I'd brought, anchoring it to the base of the grill. The wall was slick with sea spray, and the wind threatened to tear us from our precarious handholds. I went first, my architect's mind, so used to calculating loads and stresses, now consumed with the single primal thought of not falling. I reached the bottom, a rocky outcrop just above the waves, and looked up. Alara was descending, her silhouette a fragile shape against the immense dark wall. She was the bravest person I had ever known. We half climbed, half fell into the skiff, our bodies bruised and exhausted. The small boat, guided by its simple navigation system, turned and began to motor slowly out into the open sea. There were no victory cries, no tears of joy. We were too drained, too numb. We simply huddled together in the bottom of the boat, wrapped in a thermal blanket, and watched as the coastline of the richest, strictest nation on earth receded into the darkness. The 7 minutes of the blackout ended. The lights of the kingdom flickered back to life along the coast, a string of perfect, cold diamonds. Searchlights began to sweep the sea, their beams cutting across the waves. We were terrifyingly exposed. The skiff's low profile and stealth technology were our only protection. We lay flat, not daring to breathe, as one of the beams swept directly over us. It passed without pausing. They hadn't seen us. For hours we drifted in the darkness, the skiff silently carrying us further into international waters. As the first hint of dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink, Alara finally spoke. "We did it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "We actually did it." I looked at her, her face smudged with grime and lit by the nascent light of a new day, and I knew that I had never seen anything more beautiful. We were free. Freedom was not a grand arrival, it was a rusty cargo ship that picked us up at the designated coordinates. Its captain, a grizzled man who asked no questions and simply accepted the payment tokens I gave him. It was a cramped, smelly cabin for a week-long journey and bland, tasteless food. After the opulent perfection of the kingdom, this new world was gritty, chaotic, and gloriously beautifully imperfect. We landed in a sprawling, noisy port city, a riot of color, sound, and smell. People shouted, laughed, argued, and embraced in the streets. The air was thick with the aroma of 100 different kinds of street food. There were no visible cameras, no silent patrols. It was messy and vibrant and alive. For the first few days, we were overwhelmed, suffering from a kind of sensory culture shock. Alara would often just stand on a street corner, a look of wonder on her face, watching the simple, unrestrained flow of humanity.
Ouch.
We had nothing. Our bank accounts, our identities, our entire histories had been erased. We were ghosts who had slipped through the cracks. We found a small, cheap room to rent, and I started looking for work. Any work, taking on menial construction jobs that were a world away from the grand designs I had once created. It was hard, humbling work, but at the end of the day, I would come home to Alara, and we could walk down the street holding hands. And that felt like the greatest luxury in the universe. The memories of the kingdom faded slowly, like a dream, but they never disappeared completely. Sometimes I would wake up in a cold sweat, imagining the sound of a patrol drone outside our window. Lara had nightmares of the white, silent rooms of the re-education centers. We were free, but we carried the scars of the cage with us. We had escaped the nation, but escaping its influence on our minds was a much longer journey. One day, I saw a news report about the grand opening of the National Gallery I had designed. There it was, my creation, a swirling masterpiece of glass and light, a symbol of the regime's power and prestige. My name was never mentioned, of course. The official narrative was that it had been designed by a committee of national visionaries. I felt a strange mix of pride and revulsion. Part of me, the architect, was proud of its beauty. But the man who had crawled through filth to escape it knew the terrible truth it represented. Alara found her freedom in art. She started painting, not in secret, but in a small, shared studio. Her canvases were explosions of color and emotion. Filled with all the passion and fire she had been forced to suppress for so long, she painted the darkness of the tunnels, the coldness of the city, and the fierce, burning hope of escape. Her work was raw, honest, and powerful, and people were drawn to it. She was finally able to speak her truth, not in whispers, but in bold, brilliant strokes. Years passed. We built a new life, a simple life, but one that was our own. We were not rich. We often struggled to make ends meet. But we were wealthy in ways that could not be measured by currency. We had the freedom to speak our minds, to love without fear, to make our own mistakes and choose our own path. We had each other. We had learned the hard way that true wealth is not about what you own, but about what you cannot lose. The richest country in the world was, in reality, the most impoverished place we had ever known. Our story is a reminder that the most beautiful facades can hide the darkest truths, and that the human spirit has a remarkable capacity to seek out the light. It's a story about the real meaning of prosperity. We wanted to share it with you, to open your eyes, just as ours were opened. We hope it made you think, and we hope it made you feel. Thank you for watching and for being a part of our journey. The world is full of stories that need to be told, and we're going to keep telling them. If you want to hear more and to join a community that values freedom of thought and expression, please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us keep the light shining in the darkness.